Welcome back to this next video in which we are discussing acne. So in this next video we're going to discuss the treatment for acne. However, before we move on to that, there are two more things that I'd just like to mention. So the first of those two things is the distribution of acne, the typical distribution of acne. So in previous videos, what we have said is that in principle, acne can affect any area of non-glabrous skin. And as we've discussed previously, most of the skin that covers the human body is non-glabrous. However, we all know that there are certain areas of non-glabrous skin that are far more likely to be affected by acne than other areas. So, for instance, by far and away, the most common area of skin to be affected by acne is the face, followed by the neck and the back and the chest. If you're unlucky, it can also affect the arms and the groin area. It's much rarer that it would affect areas like the legs or the abdominal region, but in principle it can affect those areas as well. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I want to talk about quickly is the timescale for the pathogenesis of acne. So just coming back up here, here's our picture of the pathogenesis. So we saw in the previous video that androgens are believed to be the fundamental culprit in acne. So after puberty, androgens go up, and androgens somehow are believed to cause this phenomenon of hyperkeratinization, where the skin cells do not shed away from the surface of the epidermis correctly, and instead you get the epidermis thickening, and this causes a problem because it clogs up the pores, clogging up the entrance to the hair follicles. Then what happens is that the sebum cannot drain and therefore builds up in the hair follicle. The whole thing balloons out. Propionibacterium acnes, to make matters worse, starts dividing in that sebum, and then eventually this thing is going to become so large that it will become visible. It's then known as a whitehead, and it can then break open, and depending on the route where it breaks open, if it breaks open at the top, then it becomes a blackhead. If it breaks open into the dermis, it of course becomes an inflammatory papule. We also discussed that androgens make matters even worse because they increase sebaceous output, and therefore the rate at which the hair follicles are going to be filled up with sebum is going to be increased even further. So that's going to make everything worse. But remember, the fundamental problem is the hyperkeratinization, the blocking up of the pores, rather than the increased sebaceous output. Okay, so that's just a recap of what we did last time. The bit that I wanted to add is to give you some idea of the timescale that it takes for this to actually happen. So let's say that we have a prepubescent child who is about to go through puberty. So let's say we've got a 13-year-old who's about to go through puberty, and at the present, the pores are perfectly healthy. The skin is not showing this phenomenon of hyperkeratinization. Sebum is draining perfectly. How long does it take following the rise of androgens for acne to actually occur? How long does it take for the pores to become blocked up, for the sebum to collect up to form a visible whitehead, and then potentially form either a blackhead or an inflammatory papule? How long does that take? Well, it's estimated that actually it's in the order of weeks for that to occur. Actually, about 8 weeks is the figure that is commonly quoted as being how long it takes to go from a perfectly healthy hair follicle to actually having a whitehead and then either a blackhead or an inflammatory papule. And let me just explore that with you a little bit further. So for this epidermis to become thickened by the hyperkeratinization process, so let's suppose we've just turned on the androgens. Androgens are coming up. This child has gone through puberty. Androgens are coming up. How long is it going to actually take the epidermis to thicken enough to clog the pore? Well, that's going to be weeks for that to occur. Remember, another interesting little fact for you. How long does it take for a skin cell to make its way up from the bottom of the epidermis to the top? The answer is 2 weeks. So remember, the base of the epidermis is made up of stem cells, the epidermal stem cells, that are continuously dividing, and when they divide, they produce two cells. One of those remains the stem cell, so it remains on the surface, or on the base of the epidermis. The other one is going to actually start a differentiation process, and it's going to climb up and eventually be shed off. So that second cell moves gradually up the layers, and as it's moving up, it's changing its characteristics, it's differentiating, and it's gradually becoming one of these pancake cells that is filled with keratin. So it's becoming more pancakey in shape, more flattened, and it's making loads of keratin and filling its cytoplasm with keratin. And that process, from being born from a epidermal stem cell to being actually shed away from the surface of the epidermis, that takes 2 weeks. So these poor cells, their lifetime is 2 weeks, alas. So that sort of justifies why it's going to take in the order of weeks for the epidermis to actually build up, because the time scale of the epidermal turnover is about 2 weeks. So it's going to take in the order of weeks for it to actually build up and thicken once you actually turn the androgens on. Okay, then, once you've actually got the clogged pore, it's then going to take, again, time for the hair follicle to actually fill up with sebum, again, in the order of weeks for that to actually occur. So from the clogged pore to the actual whitehead lesion, it's going to take weeks. Again, if you've got lots of androgens, then the sebaceous output's increased, so that will help speed it up a bit. Then the final bit is very, very quick. To go from a whitehead to either a blackhead or an inflammatory papule, the thing just has to burst. And of course, that's a, click, it happens, and then the next part of the journey begins. So that occurs much quicker once the pressure has built up enough. So overall, the pathogenesis, the figure of how long it takes to occur is 8 weeks, and that's the second thing I wanted to mention. So let's now go down and discuss the treatment for acne briefly. So, there are a huge number of treatments for acne. We are not going to go through all of them. We are going to discuss four major ones that you should know. The first is topical retinoids. The second is topical benzoyl peroxide. Third is oral antibiotics. And the fourth is oral retinoid therapy, hence the picture here. Now, I've said them in that order for a reason, because that's the order we're going to discuss them. When it comes to the treatment of acne, we talk about the fact that there is a treatment ladder. And this ladder is the order in which you work through treatments. So if you develop acne as a teenager and you go and see your general practitioner, your GP, for treatment, they will start you on the first treatment of this ladder, and if that doesn't work, they'll move you on to the second one, and so on. They work their way up the ladder, or at least they try to work their way up the ladder. So we're going to discuss the ladder from bottom to top, because that's the order in which you'd actually work through these treatments. So, first line treatment then for acne, the treatment that a GP should put someone on when they first present seeking treatment for acne, is topical retinoids. So topical means that it's applied to the skin, so it's either a gel or a cream. Retinoid is an interesting word. Retinoid refers to chemicals that are derivatives of vitamin A. Now, vitamin A is an incredibly powerful molecule, very, very biologically active, incredible biological effects. Retinoids are molecules that have very similar structures to vitamin A. They're where clever chemists have taken vitamin A and they've modified it slightly to create a new molecule, and that molecule still shares some of the biological activity of the original vitamin A. And those class of molecules, therefore, have very strong biological effects and are useful in the field of medicine. And they're used in several different branches of medicine, dermatology being one of the crucial examples, but also they have a big use in hematology for the treatment of certain types of leukemia. So, retinoids, powerful derivatives of vitamin A. So, what are the examples of topical retinoids? Well, I'm going to give you 2 examples of topical retinoids. They're effectively equivalent. One is adapalene and the other is tazarotene. So they both work in the same way and they're about equally efficacious, and which one you get given will depend on where you live and which one your GP prefers or which one is cheaper for them to buy in that area, things like that, technical issues. But as far as the actual pharmacology is concerned, they're going to do the same thing and they're about equally efficacious. So these are creams or gels that contain these retinoid chemicals, adapalene or tazarotene, and you're going to apply them to the area of skin that is affected by the acne. And how are they actually going to work? Well, the reason that we like topical retinoids is because we believe that they actually target the fundamental problem with acne, which is hyperkeratinization. We believe that somehow these stop the hyperkeratinization process. They stop the epidermis from misfunctioning in this way and not shedding cells correctly and becoming too thick. They make the cells shed normally again and therefore stop the pores fundamentally becoming clogged and therefore going to stop the whole pathogenesis of acne. We also think, to add to their effect, a little bonus effect, that they also make their way down to the sebaceous glands. And just to go to our diagram, you'll apply it here, so you'll rub it in, and then it will sort of make its way down into the skin. So they're going to make their way down to the sebaceous glands, and we think they also actually reduce sebaceous output. In fact, we're pretty confident that they reduce sebaceous output. So, sorry about that, dropped the pen. They're going to work in these two ways, stopping hyperkeratinization and stopping or reducing sebaceous output. So effectively they undo these nasty things that the androgens have done and therefore are going to help prevent acne. So that's the topical retinoids, and they are the first line treatment for acne, and they are pretty good. So let's make our way up the ladder. However, they might not work, and therefore if they don't work, you move on to the next part of the ladder. And the next part of the ladder is still topical therapy, so we haven't got to oral systemic therapy yet, we're still on topical therapy. So the next treatment up in the ladder is topical benzoyl peroxide. So again, this is a cream or a gel that contains, this time, the active ingredient benzoyl peroxide. Now, benzoyl peroxide is an example of what we call a keratolytic. It causes skin cells to shed. So look at this word. Kerato refers to keratin. Lytic means to break apart. So it's going to break apart the keratin layer of the skin. It's going to break apart the outer layer of the epidermis. It is a skin peeling agent. It makes your skin shed faster, and therefore it's going to be advantageous in acne because it's going to make the epidermis shed faster. It's going to hopefully help undo hyperkeratinization. It's going to hopefully help unclog these pores by making these skin cells shed, and therefore hopefully it's going to help reverse the pathogenesis of acne and stop it from happening again. So that's topical benzoyl peroxide, a keratolytic. It works to increase the shedding of cells. And note, it works in a different way to the retinoids. The retinoids we believe, actually stop whatever is going wrong that is causing the hyperkeratinization. Benzoyl peroxide is a skin peeler on anyone. If you put it on anyone's skin, it will break apart their skin cells and make the skin shed faster. Okay, so it works on anyone's skin, whereas the topical retinoids, they're softer, they're more, we think, undoing the thing that is actually wrong in acne skin, and they'd have less effect if you applied them to someone's skin who doesn't have acne. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So topical retinoids, and then second line treatment is topical benzoyl peroxide. So we're now moving up the ladder and we're now getting to the higher levels. So the next level up is oral antibiotics. And there are two major antibiotics that are used in acne, and these are tetracycline and erythromycin. Now, tetracycline is in the class of tetracyclines. So tetracyclines is an entire class of antibiotics, and there are loads of tetracycline antibiotics. However, in that class, there is an antibiotic that is called tetracycline, and that antibiotic is actually commonly used to treat acne, but you can use other tetracyclines as well, such as doxycycline or minocycline. But tetracycline, the tetracycline, is the commonly used one. And then there's another drug that's in a totally different class of antibiotics called erythromycin. This is in the class of macrolide antibiotics, and it can also be used in acne. So how are these going to work? Well, quite simply, these are going to kill Propionibacterium acnes, and that means that they're going to help hugely reduce the inflammation. So in people with lots and lots of papular acne, so lots and lots of these inflammatory papules, like our picture here, you can give an oral antibiotic to help reduce the papules, to make them less inflamed. Because remember, the cause of the inflammation is that when the hair follicle breaks open down into the dermis, you release all this sebum that is filled with Propionibacterium acnes, and that is a bacterium and that should not be there. If you give a oral antibiotic, that is going to be delivered into the hair follicle, and it's going to kill the Propionibacterium acnes, and then when the thing breaks open, you'll have sebum but no Propionibacterium acnes, or at least very low levels of Propionibacterium acnes, and you'll get much less inflammation if that is the case, and therefore the acne will look much better. Obviously, this does not target the fundamental pathogenesis of acne. It does not target the hyperkeratinization, but it will help to improve the appearance of the acne, and it will help to prevent scarring, because that's something that we haven't actually talked about. Having these inflammatory lesions on your skin can lead to scarring there, and obviously if you reduce the amount of inflammation you're going to have when these hair follicles burst open, then you will reduce the risk of scarring. So oral antibiotics are useful for improving the appearance of acne and reducing scarring, even if they don't actually stop the pathogenesis. The problem with oral antibiotics is that resistance can develop. The Propionibacterium acnes that colonizes your skin can become resistant to these antibiotics, and therefore they can stop working. So, finally, let's go on to the final level of treatment for acne, which is oral retinoid therapy. And there is only one oral retinoid that we give, and this is a drug known as Isotretinoin. And this is by far and away the most powerful treatment for acne there is. It is much better than any of the others, and I'm going to spend the most time discussing it. So Isotretinoin is more commonly known by its infamous brand names, Accutane and Roaccutane. So it was originally, of course, under patent, and its two names were Accutane and Roaccutane. Accutane was its American name, and Roaccutane was its United Kingdom name, or the name that it was sold under in the United Kingdom by the original drug company that created it. It is no longer under patent and is now made by a huge number of different drug companies and just sold under the generic name Isotretinoin, but people still call it the original names that it had, which are Accutane and Roaccutane. So be aware, if you hear those names, they're referring to Isotretinoin, this oral retinoid. So again, it is a retinoid. It is a derivative of vitamin A. This time, rather than applying it as a cream onto the surface of the skin that is affected by acne, you're going to take it as a pill. Now, this is a very, very, very good treatment for acne. You take this drug for usually about 5 months, and many of the people who take it are completely cured. It is the closest thing we have to a cure for acne. In fact, some people estimate that about 80% of people who take oral Isotretinoin are cured by it. So you take it for a period of about 5 months. You take it every day, once a day, usually with something, usually with meals, because it is a fat-soluble compound, because it's a retinoid, and retinoids are derived from vitamin A. Vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin, so you need to take it with some sort of fat, so a glass of milk or something like that. You take it for 5 months, and by the end of that treatment period, it most likely will have got rid of every single spot that you have. You will most likely have completely clear skin, no more acne. And what's even more incredible is that when people stop taking it after that 5 months, you might expect that once they come off the drug, it will come back. That usually isn't the case. In fact, as I say, it's estimated that in 80% of people, they get permanent remission of the acne. It never comes back. And you have effectively cured the acne. In the other 20%, it will come back, but usually if it does come back, it comes back much less severe than it was initially. So, let's just talk about the mechanism of this drug. So it's the same as the mechanism of the topical retinoids. It's going to stop the hyperkeratinization process, and it also reduces sebaceous output. The question then is, why can it have a prolonged effect even after you stop taking it? Because if it works in the same way as the topical retinoids and just stops the hyperkeratinization and the sebaceous output, surely when you stop taking it, then the hyperkeratinization and the sebaceous output will come back. Potentially, we don't know the answer of why that is, but potentially the reason that it is able to have such a long-term effect is that vitamin A is stored in the liver, and it's stored for years. So this is a fact that we know. The vitamin A, you have stores of vitamin A in your liver, and the stores that you have in your liver last you for years. You could stop eating vitamin A now, and the stores that you have in your liver would last for years. So the liver is used to storing vitamin A for years and years and years, and it can also store compounds that are very closely related to vitamin A. So we think that potentially when you take isotretinoin, one of its metabolites, we don't think that it's the actual drug itself, we think that potentially one of its metabolites is stored in the liver for a long, long time, gradually released, and therefore has a long-term effect after you've taken it. So we think that the 5 months or so that you take the drug for, you're effectively stocking up your supply of the metabolite of this drug in your liver. It's going to be gradually released then over the subsequent years and continuously prevent hyperkeratinization and reduce sebaceous output. And that, we think, is how it can produce permanent remission. By the time that it eventually wears off, you will probably be an adult, because we've given you this maybe when you're 16, and by the time it wears off, you'll probably be an adult, and therefore you will have probably grown out of acne anyway, your androgens will have steadied out, and you won't be prone to hyperkeratinization and increased sebaceous output anyway, and you won't therefore be prone to acne. So by the time that the drug wears off, we think that you've grown out of the acne anyway, which is how it can produce a permanent cure. That's how we speculate, and all of this is controversial. We don't know as much about oral isotretinoin as we'd like to know. Okay, so that, we believe, is how the drug works. Some things that you must say about isotretinoin: it is the last resort treatment for acne, and the reason for that is that it is a serious drug to take. It can have side effects. It will have side effects. Most people who take it, get some degree of side effects, and the side effects that are commonly experienced are incredibly dry skin, and the reason for that is that it completely effectively shuts off the sebaceous glands when you're actually taking the drug, and also incredibly dry eyes, because it affects the meibomian glands of the eyelids, which secrete something similar to sebum onto the undersides of the eyelid, so you can get very dry eyelids and inflammation of the eyelids known as blepharitis. You also end up with very dry lips and very dry oral mucosa. So these are the common side effects. Another very important point to say about isotretinoin is that it and all of the retinoids, vitamin A as well, is extremely teratogenic. So this is a big fancy word in medicine. Teratogenic means that it will affect developing babies. So if you take this drug whilst you are pregnant, it can cause massive birth defects in the developing baby. So you must not take this drug whilst pregnant. That's what teratogenic means. It means it will damage a developing baby, so it must not be taken during pregnancy. And vitamin A, midwives often recommend caution with vitamin A. They don't like women taking vitamin supplements with vitamin A in during pregnancy. They want folic acid but not vitamin A, because it too in high levels can cause birth defects and is teratogenic. So isotretinoin, oral isotretinoin, must not be given during pregnancy. Isotretinoin also has a few other controversies around it. So we've been over the common side effects: very dry skin, very dry lips, and dry eyes. But it also has some much rarer side effects that are very, very severe and which have received a lot of significant press attention over the years, which is why the drug is so infamous. So it has been associated with depression, and there are several cases of people committing suicide whilst taking isotretinoin. It's also been associated with IBS and, more severely, IBD, inflammatory bowel disease. Another rare, very rare side effect, but significant side effect that it's been associated with, is idiopathic intracranial hypertension, raised pressure inside the skull for no apparent reason. which can cause very bad headaches and can also damage the optic nerves and lead to permanent impairments in vision. So it's very serious. So isotretinoin can have some very, very rare but very, very serious side effects. And in everyone who takes it, it will have the common side effects of drying out the skin and the lips and the eyes very severely. And it's also extremely teratogenic and must not be taken by anyone who is pregnant or is going to become pregnant. Okay, so that is the oral retinoid therapy, isotretinoin. So just to finish the video then, let's summarize the treatment ladder for acne. So this is the treatment ladder, this is the start, and this is the end. So topical retinoids, two examples of which are adapalene and tazarotene. These are applied onto the area that is affected, and they, we believe, stop the hyperkeratinization process and reduce sebaceous output. If those don't work, you move up to topical benzoyl peroxide. This is a keratolytic. It will make anyone's skin peel. It breaks the skin cells apart and speeds up the rate at which they are shed from the surface of the skin, and therefore is going to help combat the hyperkeratinization and also break open, hopefully, those clogged up pores. Up from that, we have oral antibiotics. Tetracyclines are commonly used. Within the class of tetracyclines, there is the drug tetracycline itself, which is commonly used. Also, other examples, more rarely used, are minocycline and doxycycline. Then, totally different class of antibiotics is erythromycin, which is a macrolide antibiotic. These are going to work by killing Propionibacterium acnes and stopping it from colonizing the sebum that is building up inside the hair follicle to form a whitehead, and therefore if the hair follicle does burst into the dermis, you're not going to have the same degree of colonization by Propionibacterium acnes, and you're not going to get the same degree of inflammation, and therefore the acne lesions are going to look less severe, and you're going to get less scarring. So they can be useful in the treatment of acne. Then we come on to the oral retinoid therapy, which is this drug isotretinoin, still more commonly known by its infamous brand names Accutane and Roaccutane. This is a drug that is taken for 5 months, and by the end of that 5-month therapy, most people will be completely acne-free, and most people will never get acne again. We've discussed the speculation as to why that is. It has severe side effects whilst you're on it, which can persist after you stop taking it for reasons that we've discussed. The main side effects that it causes are very dry skin, very dry eyes, very dry lips. It's extremely teratogenic and must not be taken in pregnancy, but there are these very controversial, severe, rare side effects, including depression, inflammatory bowel disease, and idiopathic intracranial hypertension, which are very dangerous. But it is a fantastic drug, and it is the closest thing that we have to acne. So, thank you for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you've learned something.